things. Duskritota, Sukritota, Aparodota, and Bhaktyuta. So material desires that are generated as a result of sins we've committed, material desires generated as a result of our pious activity in the past, material desires that are generated from the offenses we've committed, and finally material desires that are generated by bhakti itself. And these are not gotten rid of in the same way, in the same sort of schedule. So in Madhurya Kadambini, it gives us 5 categories of purification. And these 5 categories start with Bahudesha Vartini, which means that something is a little bit cleansed. It's been partially cleansed, Bahudesha Vartini. Then there's, Ekadesha Vartini, which is just partially cleansed. Then Bahudesha Vartini, which means it's substantially cleansed. And then we have Prayiki, which means it's almost completely cleansed. And then we have Purna, which is fully cleansed. And finally we have Atyantiki, which is too much of cleansed. No, actually it means absolutely cleansed. So there are these 5 stages. So we see that unwanted things are not all gotten rid of at the same time. We have one of the stages of the 9 stages of devotional purification. It's called anartha nivriti. So we're talking about anarthas, and nivriti means to have them destroyed. But we see that not all types of anarthas are destroyed with the onset of anartha nivriti. Some go on beyond the anartha nivriti stage. And then in the Madhurya Kadambini, we discover that of them all, aparadota, or offenses due to aparads, are the stickiest ones that are the last to go. So it mentions that at Bhajana Kriya, these aparad offense, or these desires born from aparad, are Ekadesha Vartini. And at Nishta, they are Bahudesha Vartini, or they're substantially cleansed. At Ruchi, they are Purna, or rather, they are Prayiki. They are almost completely cleansed. And finally, at when the Supreme Lord reveals himself to the devotee, are they absolutely cleansed. So even at prema, they are only purna, they are only fully cleansed. Only when you actually meet the Supreme Lord are all material desires due to offensive mentality completely removed. Now we can, compare that to duskritotama, or unwanted things that unwanted desires that are generated by sinful action. So already at Bhajana Kriya, they are Prayiki. So at Bhajana Kriya, they are, almost completely cleansed. And at Atashakti, they are Atyantiki, absolutely cleansed. So they come and go pretty fast. And by the time you get to Atashakti, at that stage, there are no material unwanted desires remaining from past sins. Now, when we talk about Bhakti-yuta, what about them? So we find that again, at Bhajana Kriya, they are, we begin to cleanse them, in other words, Ekadesha Vartini, and at Ruchi, they are Adyantaki. So it doesn't give us a schedule of how it works with Sukritota. So, but at any rate, we can see that the most sticky ones, the ones that last the longest, the ones that are hardest to get rid of, are the unwanted desires that come as a result of the offenses that we make. So those will be the battles that we will have all the way till the time that we meet Krishna face to face. So the other ones tend to be expunged earlier in the process of devotional service. Of course, I don't expect anyone to remember all these different categories, but I wanted to just enumerate them to kind of help myself to remember and grasp how it's laid out. But also, by understanding these things, we can see that there are different categories of unwanted things, and that purification takes place in several categories at the same time. And from these various categories, which are the hardest things to ultimately dig out of the soul and throw away, So this is how it works. And so offenses are pretty sticky. And to get free from offenses is actually a very high achievement. To make an effort to perform devotional service, we have to constantly keep in mind that we are performing devotional service and we're trying not to commit offenses. And, in some temples, they recite the 10 offenses every morning, which are listed in the Padma Puran. So it's good to remind yourself of them and then meditate on whether you are getting rid of them or not. Because as we know that it says, Bahu Janma Kari Yadi Shravana Kirtanam Tabutana Paya Krishna Pade Premadana. If one is infested with the 10 offenses in the matter of chanting the holy names, if one can chant the holy name for millions of births and not get the love of Godhead, which is the ultimate goal of this chanting. So if we embrace the offenses, even with the process of chanting the holy name, it will slow down our progress in being purified by the holy name. So in the Harinam Chintamani it mentions that the sun is brilliant, and where is the question of a little cloud on planet Earth blocking out the sun? But if that cloud happens to be between us and the sun, it can block out the sun for us, not that it blocks out the sun. So in a similar way, by engaging in making these various 10 offenses, we slow down the process of Krishna consciousness. So it behooves us to try to meditate on if and how we're making these various offenses and to gradually remove them from our lives. And as we do, the holy name will much more rapidly have an effect on our heart. So in the beginning, we may not know that there are 10 offenses, but once we learn that there are 10 offenses, it will not be a question of whether or not we're making the 10 offenses. We will be making the 10 offenses. The question is, are we actually trying to stop doing it? And that's what makes the difference between namaparad and namabas, because namaparad means that you are in the offensive stage of chanting, and namabas means that you're in the clearing stage of chanting. So the offensive stage means that you're making offenses against the holy name, and you just don't care, or you're spacing out. Whereas Namabhas means we are still making offenses, but we know that they're offenses and we're trying to stop. So that's the thing that just differentiates those two. So we recognize that if someone is engaged in devotional service, they are in the hospital, as we say. So if we go into the hospital ward and we look at the beds and we say, oh, there's somebody who's got a disease, get them out of here. How practical is that, So we can recognize that it's the same thing in devotional service, in any kind of congregation of devotees. We will see that there are still remnants of the disease. And when Prabhupada was once asked, how many pure devotees are there in ISKCON? Prabhupada asked the devotee, well, how many devotees are there in ISKCON? So as Prabhupada mentions in this very purport right here, that if one is sincerely following the process of Krishna consciousness, one may be considered to be a pure devotee. Kind of a pure devotee in potential. So if a person is a true pure devotee, their heart is completely melted to Krishna. They always do the right thing because there's no desire in them that would make them do the wrong thing. It's just not there, Now, if we instead contrast our own selves, we see that it ain't quite like that yet. So what we do realize is that we are trying to do the right thing because we know what the right thing is, and we're trying to do that even though we don't naturally feel it. And if we did what we felt like doing, it wouldn't be anything like that. It would be something quite different, So we are trying to bend our actions. But as we progress in devotional service, we're bending less and less. And as we understand in Bhagavad Gita that we reach the stage of achieving a higher taste, which is, as we were just talking about, the Ruchi platform. So if one gives up material desires, by achieving a higher taste, one becomes fixed. So one can refrain from material actions and material sense gratification, but one still wants to do them. However, there eventually comes a point where one doesn't want to do material desires. One sees possibility of doing a material thing, a sense gratification, activity, or offending somebody, or getting some wonderful benediction, but one is honestly not attracted to that, as opposed to seeing one of those things and recognizing, whoa, that sounds good, but I know it's going to get me in trouble. That's a different platform. So eventually it's like that, that we get to the stage where we have ruchi, or taste, where we no longer feel attracted. And this is how this process of purifying works. We purify from the platform of getting rid of our material desires, unwanted things that come as a result of sinful action, material desires that come as a result of pious action in the past, material desires that come as a result of various offenses we've committed, and finally material desires that come as a result of the bhakti that we have engaged. So this is a gradual process. And therefore, as Prabhupada mentions, that we have, a character. And that character may be as a result of, from the external point of view, where we were born, our, background, our ethnicity, all these things. And then we have our internal character. And that is as part of devotional service. So habits are hard to give up. And some habits aren't necessarily sinful in themselves. They're just habits, Therefore, in Harinam Chintamani, it mentions that one who evaluates devotees on the basis of their birth or their caste or any of these kind of things is possessed of a hellish mentality. So we have to learn how to gradually give up this tendency and not evaluate devotees in that way, which is also what's being promoted here in this verse. So I want to give a little bit of time for questions and answers. Do we have our mic? Is it available?
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for a very sobering class. I was just thinking, I heard that you said that we kind of pure devotees.
That what?
That we are kind of pure devotees.
Yeah.
Right? But of course, there are real pure devotees out there, and we know that by serving them, we can acquire their qualities. How does it exactly works? How, do you know, technical part of it?
What's that?
Technical part of it. I was just thinking, how can, just by being with someone and serving them, we can acquire their qualities?
Oh, acquire.
How does it work?
Yesterday, our Matunga gave a very nice class on the 26 qualities, which were discussed in yesterday's verse. I thought that was very nice, And this is actually where the rubber meets the road in religion. I was going to make this point, but I'll make it now. That why do people hate religion? Mostly because of their experience with people who practice that religion. I've had people come up to me and say, "Do you know that Jesus Christ loves you?" I said, "Well, Jesus Christ may, but it's quite obvious you don't." So I mean. There are people who, by their behavior, drive people away from religion, because they think, well, if this is what religion does for people, hey, I think I'll go with typhus or something like that instead, or, I'd rather have diphtheria. So we should also remember that it isn't just one religion. Devotees can be like this too. It's when kind of holier than thou, a sense of I'm something, you're nothing. I know everything, you know nothing. These kinds of attitudes are what push people away from religion. So we should not do that. And this is relevant because what this verse is talking about is the Supreme Lord saying that when the devotees do something that's not nice, it's a scar on him. We are representing the Supreme Lord. If people experience a bad relationship or a bad situation as a result of something we did, it reflects poorly on the Supreme. And commonly people think like this. I mean, this is not rocket science at this point, If they're treated harshly, badly, demeaningly, condescendingly by people who represent the Supreme, what are regular people supposed to think about the Supreme? So we have to keep this in mind. We should try to deal with everyone in a way that we make them think, I don't know who that person was, but I like them. Whatever they are into, I kind of would like to know something more about it, which is the way the Supreme is. So just as the Supreme Lord is indicating to the four Kumaras that Jai and Vijay, they made an offense, and therefore I consider it my offense. And so he's apologizing on behalf of the four Kumaras. And what to speak of people who have grown up in a religion and been molested as a child, or grown up in a religion and been, forced to do things they didn't want to do, or, so many other things, browbeaten, chastised, denigrated, and all these kind of things. This is why religion has a bad rep. And, it's hard to argue with that, but we should not make it any worse. We should try to make it better. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
For the 10 offenses...
Wait, let's get to it, because there are people that will be watching this on YouTube.
For the offenses, are they as sticky if they're made in ignorance? So if you just join and you're learning and you don't really know anything, and
Right.
And then you read and you're like, oh wow, this was totally an offense. Is it as sticky as if you did it willingly?
I haven't read anything, but personally I feel that it is not, because generally speaking, when people first start chanting the holy name, they really get a lot of immediate realization, and that's a lot of times why people just get into Krishna consciousness. But we discover that over time, that feeling fades. And that's usually because we're chanting, but we're committing offenses at the same time. And by that time, we should have learned what they are, and we should have made an effort to stop doing them. So I think that's what's happening, that in the beginning, because you don't know nothing about nothing, then you're chanting, and the Supreme Lord is just happy that you have started chanting. But if you're serious about the process and you want to get somewhere in the process, then you have to learn what the 10 offenses are, blaspheme the devotees who dedicated their lives to propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2, to consider names of demigods like Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma to be equal to or independent of the name of Vishnu. 3, disobey the orders of spiritual master, 4, to blaspheme Vedic literature pursuant to Vedic version. 5, is to consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6, to give some interpretation of the Lord. 7, is to commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting. 8, is to consider chanting Hare Krishna. It's one of the auspicious ritualistic activities offered in the Vedas. Fruitive activities, karma kanda. 9, instruct a faithless person about the glories of the holy. 10, to have complete faith in the chanting of the holy names and maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It's also an offense to be unattended while chanting. So these are described in several places in Prabhupada's book. So there are 10, actually 11, depending on how you count. And the ones that we really should pay most attention to is probably the first one. The blaspheme devotees have dedicated their lives for propagating the holy name of the Lord. So as we're hearing here, this is amply promoted in this part of Bhāgavatam, that particular concept, that we have to try to rid ourselves of the tendency to criticize devotees harshly. If you're a manager, yes, sometimes you have to tell devotees they're doing things wrong or whatever it is. But in the long run, you still have to be respectful. Okay, so it's 5 after, and we should probably taper it off at this point. And I appreciate your kind attention. All glories to Śrimad Bhāgavatam. All glories to Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Candraśekhara Maharaj ki